All right, we can go ahead and start.
Perfect. I would now like to call the April 19th, 2023 Longmont Sustainability Advisory Board meeting to order. Could we please start with a roll call?
Yes, Kate Collardson.
Here.
Jim Metcalf.
Here.
Mary Lynn.
Here.
Michelle Roth.
Here.
Charles Musgrave.
I'm here.
Robert Davidson.
Present.
Ralph Grosswald.
Here.
Lisa Knobloch.
Here.
Francie Jaffe.
Here.
Debbie Seidman.
Here.
Josie Ann Vallette.
Here.
Carmen Ramirez.
Here.
And Heather McIntyre is here. Councilmember Martin is on her way in right now. So Chair, you have a quorum.
Perfect. Thanks. I will now read our land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge that Longmont sits on the traditional territory of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and other indigenous peoples. We honor the history and the living and spiritual connection that the First Peoples have with this land. It is our commitment to face the injustices that happened when the land was taken and to educate our communities, ourselves, and our children to ensure that these injustices do not happen again. Okay, let's move on to approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Did everyone get a chance to review those? And would anybody like to make a motion to approve?
I will move to approve the minutes from last meeting.
Perfect. We have one. Jim has moved to approve.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Are you abstaining there, Robert?
Yeah, I missed the last meeting, and there's plenty of other people who know exactly what happened. So
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, the minutes are approved. Are there any revisions to the agenda or documents that need to be submitted?
The only small revision to the agenda is that I had Levi Brown listed for the airport resolution item, and I will be taking that piece on.
Okay,
So just a small change.
great, thanks. Perfect. Okay, well then we will move on to our general business. I'm going to ask that everyone hold comments and questions until the end of the presentation after staff has finished presenting. So here to talk to us about creating inclusive and welcoming boards is Carmen Ramirez.
Yeah, and I'm actually just going to jump in real quick
please.
for a second before Carmen gets started. And I'll let Carmen speak to this as well, but this piece is really conversational. So
Forget what I said.
We don't have a presentation planned, but I just wanted to preface this conversation. We sent you all some materials in your packet, and I just want to reiterate that at the City of Longmont, we're doing a lot of internal work, and the city, especially Carmen and her team, have been doing a lot of equity work in the community for a very long time. But we work to really promote those brave and compassionate spaces where we can accept uncomfortable conversations and be considerate of different mindsets and feelings. I just want to reiterate that. And there's been some recent events at the board through some information from members of the public and just other conversations that have come up that we just thought it would be really helpful to have a conversation with board members about creating welcome and inclusive spaces. And so Carmen's gonna help us have a conversation around really what that means to create a welcoming and inclusive space. How do we address comments that might be made through public invited to be heard, and then any potential challenging dynamics that come up within the board itself, so that we can continue to get our business done as a board, and we can have productive and meaningful conversations while doing that. We will send some tools in your packet, some videos for you all to have a look at ahead of time. Hopefully you all had a chance to do that. But just wanted to give you some context and background. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Carmen for our conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me come in and really help facilitate this conversation. And as you all know, you had homework in your packet. You had some videos to take a look at, and you had this one particular tool called the VCR, Validate, Challenge, and Request, right? And so really, you're the board that is hearing from diverse perspectives and have diverse perspectives on the board. And how do we have those meaningful conversations that sometimes get a little challenging? And how do I make requests, or how do you make requests that says, okay, I want to hear your point of view, which may be diverse or different from mine. And the way that I can best hear that, it might be to, in my understanding, there was some imagery in an email or some wording in an email that was inappropriate. And I think that really is kind of the basis. And I was here just to really maybe have a conversation of how we do that, or what are the resources that you need. You should know also that I've been with the city for over 20 years and also a mediator, and I've done kind of high conflict, racial and other differences, cultural differences in the community. And it's not easy in the moment, but with lots of practice, then I've gotten better at how to really redirect, challenge, and or even let me help understand a little bit better, but do me a favor, and these words are hurtful or these words are inappropriate. So I'm going to turn it over to you all and see if you have questions or thoughts or need additional resources. And if nobody needs anything, that's okay too.
I see Jim's hand up, and then Ralph.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for coming, and I think thank you for the material that you sent and all that stuff. I guess one of the things that I'm a little bit, I'm not totally sure about is the degree to engage sometimes. Like I felt this when we got that email, and that email was cleared up incredibly quickly. Like by the time I saw it and there's a flurry of responses, I think I was away from my desk for a while, and it was like basically cleared up and dealt with by the time I saw it. But a few times just where comments like I don't actually know about the usefulness of engaging at sometimes. Obviously I don't want to get like defensive and mad or get drawn into something, but that's something that I'm never sure with, like position on the board and and all the things that go into that, what the general rules, I don't know, rules of engagement, I don't know what the correct terms are, but that's just something that I felt at the last meeting as well, with some of the things that were directed at us, what we should be thinking about in terms of how to engage with not comments that are questioning decisions that we're making or challenging or offering different perspectives, but that are actually kind of insulting.
Well, so a couple of things to consider in that area is that the staff liaisons are really your resource. So if it's in writing, an email or a letter, once in a while we still get a letter. If it's in writing and it gives you pause, whether the text feels like it's insulting or it's racially disparaging or insulting in other ways, then that's your opportunity to consult with staff. And many times, and I think that's James, that's a really good point. Is this person expressing their opinion, and is there a need for me to respond to that opinion, right? And if I do need to respond because I want to provide some information, right? How do I redirect that says, my understanding, James, is that you wanted information on this. Or my understanding is that you want to appeal this, right? And then here's the steps. And then it's up to you all also, and I would say in consultation with staff, to decide, I want to address that the terms that they used were disparaging remarks. And so then you might say, and in the future, what we would expect is that please point out what exactly you need from us. And these terms are inappropriate. It's inappropriate for you to make terms, remarks about Mexicans or Latinos. That generally is what I get. So I'll use that as an example. And I think in the moment when you as a board are listening to people, that's your role to listen and maybe not necessarily engage in that moment. But once again, if it's a remark that is very serious, that you're feeling like, you know, that's really inappropriate. So I understand that you're asking for this, but I'm going to ask that you not use those terms. And then you have to realize, like, how do I shorten, like, are you going to give them more space to make their point? Right. And that's really hard to do in the moment. Or do you want to say, I hear you. I understand that you don't care for this decision, but I would ask that you not use those terms. And that's it. Right. It sounds very simple, but it is not that easy.
That's great. Ralph, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I can take it up with Heather afterwards. No need to take time here. Thanks, though.
So I have a question about circling back to something. So if something was said in a meeting and, you know, in the moment, I didn't have for whatever reason, I didn't react. I didn't respond. Right. And what's your advice on coming back to that in a future meeting?
So a couple of things. When you say coming back for the board, and there might be two layers, coming back to the individual. So I'll give you an example that actually happened in a city council meeting where a consultant used a term that was not acceptable. And staff followed up with that individual because they knew that individual was going to come back again and do a presentation. And they said, in your presentation, you validate that this was the point you were trying to make. I challenge that you didn't need to use that term to make your point, and I request that you don't use it. For the board, if it's an issue of like, and again, it's a little bit challenging when it's about, it's okay to have diverse points of views, but it's really the terms that you're using. And that's what you're asking for, civility, right? You're asking for a sense of civility. You don't need to insult me to make your point that you disagree with the decision that was made with the board. And that's where the board can be supportive of one another and say, maybe we do need to have a conversation about this, whether that's separately or in public, because these are your public meetings, that says the comment that was made about Carmen at last month's meeting, I felt was inappropriate. And the rest of the board could say, we agree that that was inappropriate. And we ask the public not to make direct personal attacks, right? And so that might be one way to handle it also.
Thank you.
I just want to reiterate what Carmen said earlier also, that as staff, we're always here as a resource for you all. Can always reach out. We can strategize individually. We can help support the group as a whole. So, we recognize that as well. These are things that we're, also learning and working on practicing, as well. So just wanted to reiterate that we're here.
Thanks. Yeah, Michelle.
Yeah, I had similar questions to what you guys have about responding, and yeah, I guess I'm more just thinking out loud, but about how we can be inclusive, but when people just have their time to speak, and then if we're not responding, I'm like, are we making it inclusive because everyone can speak, or is it not inclusive enough because we're not responding and engaging with them? Is what I'm just trying to figure out, if that is inclusive or not inclusive.
It's a hard one because it doesn't feel inclusive,
Right.
but at the same time, from what I understand, we're not supposed to respond.
And anyone can speak.
anyone can speak. And
Say whatever they
so
want.
and so we've designated this time with with items from the board as, let's talk about any items that were brought up during that time. But I agree, it's an awkward feeling to have people speaking and have no response.
Yeah. Sometimes it's nice, but sometimes it's like, I want to be able to respond.
If I could just, I think, and council goes through this all the time, right? That they have to sit there and they have to listen, right? And they're not able to respond. They want to engage a conversation. That's where, to Kate's point of, how do we identify the need for follow-ups? Whether that's the comment at the end might be, I'm going to ask staff to get back to you, or we're going to follow up with a response. But it is supposed to be a session for listening, and most of the boards and commissions operate in that way. I don't think that maybe the smaller ones like the youth center and the library might have a little bit of a dialogue if they have community members that show up, but in general, it's to listen. And then the follow-up action is where you might really make space for inclusion. Having been part of bringing community members who English is not their first language, and how to make them feel comfortable and how for them to express, and sometimes providing that assistance, whether it's an interpreter, or it sounds like we need to engage in a little bit more time than the 3 minutes that you're allotted, right? So I'm going to ask staff to follow up with you. The same with individuals that have hearing impairments or speech impediments. You can always kind of facilitate that. We want to provide better access, and so we want to do the follow-up. But it's still an uncomfortable situation to be in.
Jim, go ahead.
I guess that is one thing I was a little bit curious about. I think it was Francie talked about it in the video of hers that we watched, about how if somebody wants to speak and English is not their first language, it shouldn't be the job of like a bilingual person who is already on the call to be the interpreter for it, because what do we have that process? I don't think in all the time that I've been on the board we've ever had somebody who's wanted to comment, public invited to be heard, who for whom English wasn't their first language, or at least they weren't very comfortable in giving their comment in English. I don't know that, but is that clear in our announcements of the meetings and all of those things? Do we know what that strategy is, or is it something that we have to arrange ahead of time? I don't know. I was just kind of curious what the protocol might be.
Lisa, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I love your comments too, Carmen, beyond what Francie spoke to in the video, we do have resources in place to handle that. I think what we haven't done is do a good job communicating that we have that. And so that would be something that I think is a good flag for us, that we can communicate that better, that it is an opportunity that people can come and share their thoughts in a language other than English. And it's called Language Line. It's something that we can call at any point in time, and that we can have that resource readily available. But if people don't know that that's an option, it's I think it can be intimidating enough to show up in government spaces like this and other spaces. But if that's also not very clear and transparent, it's I would think people would not assume that that is a possibility.
And if it's in written, we have staff, we have bilingual staff that could review that. And today I just used Language Line to work with an individual who's from Afghan. And the language line is actually pretty readily available. They also can be helpful with ASL, American Sign Language.
Yeah, Marcia, I see your hand.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that has come up with council on a number of occasions. In council, we have not used language line, we've used live interpreters, but which takes a little more logistics. But I would suggest that perhaps after this discussion, the board might consider a motion to amend the posting announcement for this board, so as to make that known, and then someone would know that if they want to speak, they need to arrange it in advance with Heather or someone, or Carmen. I think Heather would be appropriate once she knows the drill. That's all I have, just that suggestion.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you. Other thoughts, questions, comments?
One of the things that when Carmen and I were chatting about this, just thinking through tools that if you all are interested in, and this does not have to be the only conversation that we have around this. I see this as a beginning that we can continue to talk about and discuss, over time as however we can best support the board. But if it's helpful, there's always things that we can, similarly to the other things that we have built into the agenda, that we help kind of lay the foundation for the work that we do. There's always things that we can also build into that process to just remind folks in the way that we operate with each other and with members of the public. So we can have something at the beginning that talks about that we don't tolerate offensive material, that we operate with civility, some of the things that Carmen mentioned. So if that's helpful, we can definitely work with you all to craft something to include in the agenda or in, meeting materials and things like that as well. So a lot of things that, again, it really is up to you all and what you all think would be helpful. But if you all have thoughts or needs on tools or other resources or thoughts on what might be helpful to include in that, to just kind of keep it at the front and center.
And I would suggest that, when you open, say, public invited to be heard, you read the statement, kind of the rules of protocol and civility, and then you have the same statement listed in your agenda. So there's consistency there and folks are seeing it repeated several times. And again, I think the biggest message is this is not that we don't want to hear diverse opinions or we don't want to hear information that may not be similar to what we're thinking, but really that we just want to have a protocol of civility so we can really truly listen to all. But I pulled a couple of other articles and materials that I'm gonna send to Lisa, and then Heather will probably pass those on. There's one on tips for promoting civility in public meetings, if we didn't send that over, and another one around inclusive meetings, and we can do that. Generally, I don't think that this board holds like open forums or community meetings. But if that were to happen, these tools might be useful for that. So if
Great,
there's
thank
no
you.
other questions.
Are you all, oh, sorry, Kate, go ahead.
I was saying I don't see other questions, but what were you going to say?
I was just going to ask if you all are interested in having us craft something like Carmen had mentioned around kind of the statement of protocol and civility, if you want us to include that in the agenda. Yeah, Ro.
Yeah, I thought that was a great idea. I had the same thought. My experience being on the board less than a year is that the board itself is incredibly respectful and really working hard to hear the points of view of our board. But it would be great if we could create a statement. And Kate, I was just going to ask, do we need a motion of that? And if we do, and the board is interested in that, then we could also enlist the staff to provide some suggestions for us. And if that's appropriate, then I would make that motion.
I'm not, will that require a motion? I think it would. Yes, so.
Well,
Ralph, go
yeah,
ahead.
I would second that motion then. I think that would be wonderful to add on to it. Yeah.
Okay,
If we
so
needed it, if we hypothetically needed the motion.
I think we do need the hypothetical motion. That
Okay,
has been,
I'd be happy to make a real motion if that.
okay,
was-
please, go for it.
I move that the board introduce a statement regarding the VCR protocol prior to the public speaking, and that they engage the staff to provide guidelines and/or a script to that effect.
So the motion is to that the staff will that the board will start reminding folks of the VCR protocol in the meetings and asking staff to help us craft that script.
Make an initial statement before people begin the before we begin the public speaking portion, that would be read so that people would understand that, and that we would enlist, if you think if the board agrees, that we would get the experts to give us some guidelines on this.
Great.
I will second that real motion.
Fantastic. Any other discussion on this motion? Yeah, Mary.
So it's fine if the board wants to have guidelines for the public when speaking with the board. However, I am not in favor of clogging up our airspace with what will sound like a warning or an admonishment when it could just be included in an email that would be sent from Heather when people sign up to speak. There aren't warnings and admonishments read like this at other boards or at city council. And I don't think that it's necessary. There've been there's been a few instances where people have been heated, but from the public, and they felt frustrated and have spoken in a manner that was heated. However, I think that we run the risk of looking like we're trying to shut down speech if we go too much in the direction of trying to shut down heated comments when it could just be handled in a simple fashion, as I just mentioned.
Thanks for those thoughts. Any response there?
I think it would depend upon the wording of the guidelines. If the wording was, very restrictive and just done in such a way that basically put the public into a very small box about what was appropriate, that could be a problem. But I think there's wide latitude about venting frustration and challenging the board, for example, but still being respectful and not making the attacks personal. So I think if we craft it correctly, we can avoid making it look like we're making it an admonishment or making it kind of too restrictive of the public's ability to speak their mind.
Or do you have any objection to having it sent by Heather rather than being read?
Well, I'm not quite so sure that everyone who speaks would read the email, but having it read just before, I think, is close to the event of when it happens. And so it's, most appropriate to say it right before it happens, just because that's when the event happens. The more you disconnect those two things, the less it becomes, relevant and probably adhered to.
So do you think there's really, we have a huge reason to do it in this board versus city council and every other meeting? I mean, it just sounds like it's putting one more layer between us and the public that it makes me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, I don't think making comparison to what happens in other board meetings is really that important. I don't think that's an issue for us to consider. Other boards can operate the way they want to operate. I do think that being on a board where comments can be personal and offensive and directed at individuals, both on the board and at staff, for a less inclusive environment, and one where people are less likely to express their opinions because it's you run the risk of someone basically making this personal. And so I think hypothetically you can extrapolate this and make it very inappropriate if the language was not right and putting many layers between it. But if you're wise in how you craft something and you do it in a way that's pretty simple and respectful of people's right to speak in a public meeting, I don't think that layer, adding these layers is, it's going to be something extreme where people come and say like, that's so restrictive, I just can't speak. If we did that, I would not support it. But I think, just reminding the public, to be respectful in their comments is appropriate, especially given what we've seen the last couple of meetings.
Ralph, I saw your hand.
Yeah, this is the reason why I included in the motion that we have the people who have the expertise to practice. I think from having looked at the videos and read the information, it's very clear that this is not an aggressive approach, that it's dealt with respect and transparency. And I'm really not concerned. Certainly, speaking as a personally, I'm very interested in public discourse. I actually find the city of Longmont a little more restrictive than other communities where I've been on county boards and that sort of thing. But I have to admit that many wasted hours and productive hours were involved being engaged that way. So I certainly understand that. But even as a proponent of the public being heard, I think that we do people who come to speak a service anywhere that we can create, we can model, which actually my thesis in my master's thesis was on modeling behavior in clinical psychology, civility and respect, that we do them a favor. And I agree with Mary that we certainly don't want to intimidate anyone or have them feel that they're admonished. But I think it's actually a good use of our committee to remind people to engage civilly. So that's just a personal opinion.
I would like to remind this board that in the last meeting, it was decided that we don't, there was an agreement, not by me, but between most of the board members that we don't need to require or allow the public to send materials to board members because other boards don't do that. So the idea that we don't have to think about what other boards do and compare behavior, that seems inconsistent with the justifications that were made in the last meeting for not allowing materials to be shared from the public.
Mary, my comment was limited to this discussion about what we're talking about here, about guidelines before the public to be heard, not generally about everything that's done with all boards or with what we decided last time in terms of whether Heather should be collecting materials that were sent to her by email and then distributing to the board as they come out. I think that was a very specific instance, and I was not commenting about that.
I'm aware you weren't commenting about that. I was just making a note about procedure in decision-making in this board as a general observation based on a couple different instances.
appreciate the reminder on that. I would like to offer that when we have public invited to be heard, the beginning of that is I read 3-4 sentences to add a sentence asking folks to just our general reminder of civility would not take up that much airspace. It would, I think that I don't see harm in a general reminder. Other thoughts on this? Yeah, Charles.
Yeah, could I ask Carmen to follow up on this? I mean, she's the expert in this area, and she mentioned it originally, and we had some opinion about or experience in terms of how to word something like a guideline. And are we on the right track? Is this consistent with what she's seen and what's worked in other ways, or are we go off track too far in terms of with making a statement or that would be less inclusive and that would maybe decrease the amount of public engagement, et cetera?
We would look at crafting a statement that would really be about being inclusive. And in order to hear all voices, here's kind of the parameters, right? The personal attacks, the disparaging remarks about a particular sector of our community, those are not allowed because, or those, we're going to ask that you not use those. And it doesn't have to be, as Kate said, it doesn't have to be a lengthy statement. It can be a very short statement. And the only reason that I suggested that you repeat the same statement on your agenda and in the meeting is because generally it takes people 3 to 7 times to hear or see the message in order to say, oh, okay, I get it. This is how this board is going to listen to me. And in general, we do that in community meetings. We do that in, when you review an agenda, you talk about this is what we're going to review. And it helps the meetings to set the parameters to be inclusive, but also set to be productive in the sense of if I'm going to spend my time doing personal attacks against Carmen, that board member is not going to listen very well. And then others are also going to be reflecting on that. So how do we take that out to be able to conduct business? It's really about conducting your business and hearing what is the opinion. It's one thing to say that I'm ignorant and that I don't know what, and I should go back to my home country, right? Those comments really don't help you address the business of the sustainability board. And so I think it's okay to have a short statement that says, this is how we are going to be inclusive. And we can help you with drafting that. We can make it a very simple, broad statement. And again, it's not intended to be punitive. It's intended to make sure that all voices can be heard without being disparaging against anyone else that comes in. You will see where sometimes you have individuals that may come in and make a statement and then someone else speaks and they reference the speaker before them. That's a simple way to say that we're not going to allow personal attacks, whether it's a board member or someone else in the community, right? Or someone else that has spoken before me. So it's useful in many ways.
Thanks, Carmen.
Lisa, thank you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point to one of the things that was included in your packet. We included in there the city's recently developed equity poster, which is some of the internal equity work that we've been doing that includes the city's equity philosophy and meeting norms. And so it's also not unusual to include something like meeting norms that essentially are just agreements that whatever group comes to say within this space in order to, uphold the values that we have and get the business that we need to get done, as Carmen was referencing, we're all agreeing to these sets of norms. So I just wanted to point to that as another tool that we shared with you all that we employ actively within the city itself to say, we are actively working on this work. This is a tool that we use and how to do that.
Great. Thank you for this great discussion. Are we, Ralph, do you like the motion as it stands? Or do you want to make any changes?
Does someone have it written down so that we see what it is we're voting for? Because I was pretty rambling when I presented it.
Well, I mean, it seems like what we're voting for is to ask staff to develop a statement that we can then look at and decide if we like. I mean, like that was my interpretation of it, which I think is not a bad idea. Just like I've liked that we've started including a land acknowledgement statement at the beginning of our meetings. I think that there's room to make these things so that we can focus on the business of sustainability. So that's my understanding. That was my understanding of your motion, and then what I seconded was that we would be asking.
I'm sorry, didn't mean to talk over you. There were two steps to it. One was that we include this statement, was the first part, and the second part was that we request that staff present guidelines to us. So there's those two aspects.
So I did write down, I think pretty close to what you said. So just let me know if there needs to be any additions or changes to what I have. But I put that Ralph Grosswald moved, Jim Metcalf seconded to introduce a statement regarding VCR protocol prior to the public invited to be heard, and engage staff in crafting guidelines and or a script to be used for that.
Yes, that's perfect, Heather. Thank you.
Yep.
Charles.
Yeah, we could separate this into two steps where we first have it did, and then depending upon what we end up taking a look at later that's been put together, you can decide whether to include it or not.
Yes. Correct.
Because the motion as it is now is to include it and then have it crafted. And
oh, I see. Yeah.
If it's not accepted, it's a moot point. So that's why I didn't see a problem in having together, but I have no objection to separating. But my motion is that we include it. And if that motion passes, it would also include that we would have guidelines as part of it. That's my intention, is both of those things, not just that we say we're going to do it, but I'm proposing that we get the experts to help us do it as part of it if it passes. But I don't want to waste too much time. I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward. If it gets turned down, we don't have to worry about it. And if we pass it, meaning we want to do it, it also includes, and people can vote against this if they choose to, that we get some guidance on it.
We could add a statement at the end that said in crafting guidelines and or a script for the board's subsequent approval before implementation or something.
Perfectly good with that. Sure.
Okay.
Like
so can we vote on the motion, the amended motion? All in favor? All opposed? Okay, and abstaining, Mary? Okay.
I think it's far more important to be finding ways to be more inclusive of the public than to be spending so much time trying to protect the staff from potential information or comments that may not sit well with members.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is public invited to be heard. Each person wishing to
Hey, before you start that, can I just interject an apology to all of our members of the public? I inadvertently sent them the link to the March meeting when I sent out the meeting link to them earlier today. So you saw them all joining late, and I realized that very late after I got messages from them that I sent them the wrong link. So please forgive me for that inadvertent error. And I'm glad that you all are here with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Heather.
Sorry,
Yeah, Michelle, I see Yeah.
I just meant to say this before we moved on, but just for a note in there, for the sorry, the BRC, is that when we say something in that note, it's not just that we want the public to be inclusive, but that we're trying to be inclusive as well as the board. So it's like that we're both trying to be inclusive and not just focused on the public.
Yes. Yes, I in my mind that was implied. As part of the packet, the reading through the packet, it seemed to, for me, that was this includes both board and the public.
Yeah, just wanted to make a note.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay, now it's time for for public invited to be heard. Each person wishing to speak will be unmuted to speak one at a time. When it is your turn to speak, please state your name and address for the record. You will have 3 minutes for comment, and it's my understanding that we have 3 people who would like to speak today.
Looks like only 2 of those 3 have joined us, but we have first up Kim Zimmer.
Well, hello, board. I just want to say thank you for giving us this time to speak. I do live in Longmont for over 2 decades, and I live off of Airport. I want to say thank you to Heather. You're wonderful for getting us in last second here, as it was a little stressful having last month's link. But my comments are really related to last month's meeting as I observed all of that. I did want to appreciate all of you who are very welcoming to have us, which I think is all of you, but sometimes listening, we're not really sure. So I appreciate when you make comments that are very welcoming to us as the public. I think last time was stressful because our time was cut in half, and that adds stress to the words that we use when they weren't really intended to be that way. So I want to say first, after last month's meeting, it was kind of interesting to me because it made me think about who picks the people to be on this board. I did discover that the city council members themselves approve whether or not that person is to be on the board. I thought that was kind of interesting. The next question that came to my mind was, what if several people who applied to be on this board confessed ahead of time that they were concerned with smart meters and 5G towers, and they would like to be on the board, and they would want to do diligent research in these areas and present non-biased information to the city council on all the negative effects as well as positive effects of health, wildlife, and carbon? And then what if these applicants stated ahead of time that Longmont changed the rules on open space, and now that was once going to be open space is now going to be massive apartment buildings, wiping out wildlife, grasses, and trees and replacing it with concrete and glass towers, which we're seeing all over the place. And I've lived here for over 20 years, and it is sad to be losing all of our open space. And what if that same applicants noticed that Longmont was supposed to be planting X number of trees and they've not fulfilled their obligation? So that contributes to drought and higher CO2. And also, I just remember back in high school, it made me think about high school, like all the rat and mouse studies that were done that showed when these animals are boxed into small spaces, like maybe apartments, when they were all together, they were under stress and they fought for food and space, and they even hurt others. And that's a concern of us people in Longmont here. Now, in that box space, you add LEDs, no sun, smart meters, 5G, bad food, bad water, DNA altered food and medicine, no family, no connection, no fresh air, only a tablet. Now tie the hands of peace officers so they can no longer keep the peace. And what if someone wanted to be on the board because they truly were concerned about these things for Longmont, Boulder County, and Colorado in general? Would this person have been accepted to your board? And that is a big question I'm asking myself. So, my friends, I really believe that your hearts are really good. I truly believe that. I've heard you. I try to hear through some of your stress as I listen to my own heart and listen to my own stress about the city that I used to call beautiful and home. But sometimes I wonder, is it possible that the city council is using you guys to do the job that they're supposed to be doing? Is your board a facade? And many of us are just asking this question. We don't know. So thank you for the time, and I yield back.
Okay, thank you.
Next up is Doe Kelly.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can.
Oh, okay. Before I start, I just want to thank Heather. She quickly responded, I feel, to everything. And I actually called the city manager's office, and so some messages went around. And Heather, you are forgiven. So I'm Doe Kelly of Barberry Drive, and I'd like y'all to get your pens and your pencils ready, because we, the public, are no longer allowed after our comments to follow up with our resources directly to this board. So I'm putting some links out there right now for you and for the public. So pens and pencils ready, everyone. Okay. I've got two websites for you. One of them is Massachusetts for safetech.org. That is capital M, capital A, the number 4, safetech, capital S, capital T.org. And the second one is emfconference2021.com, emfconference2021.com. If you think no one's paying attention to the issue of dangerous wireless microwave radiation coming from smart meters, cell towers, and all manner of wireless tech, then I would say go to the Massachusetts for Safe Tech site for many fine resources of people, places, things, and events to do with a wide swath of community engagement nationwide on this expanding issue. The issue of risky wireless tech from smart meters, 5G and more is not going away. The FCC has not produced new, safer guidelines, and as you are the Sustainability Board and ought to be studying any potential issues with this alleged to be sustainable technology, as a person in the public who appears to have little control over being exposed to all kinds of toxic wireless tech daily, I would ask you to become as well informed as you can on this controversial issue, listening to the science from all sides, and especially from the independent and not industry scientists, so you can best advise Longmont City Council. On the Massachusetts site, please visit and see the resources and the news pages. So that's resources and news. In the future, look for the March 23 sustainability meeting video on the news page so people everywhere can hear what community members in Longmont and elsewhere shared with you just last month. Now, I've only just learned that the Landis & Gear smart meter that Longmont intends to deploy is one designed for the Internet of Things, so I'm pretty sure Longmont has the 5G millimeter waves up its sleeves, although I've not seen any small cells here yet. So I need you to go to the Massachusetts site, the resources page, the first link, to do with the EMF medical conference. Anyone can still enroll for a mere $45. What a deal. Until June 15th this year for continuing credits or not, and please assign a member of this board to take the course, then report your findings back to the board and we the public. The link again is emfconference2021.com. You have your assignments, and I wish you a happy No Mow May and a hearty welcome to the dandelion season.
Thank you. And so is that all, Heather?
That is all, I believe. Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, the next item on the agenda is our other business. We have the board application interview process. Lisa, the floor is yours.
Yep, so we have board applications coming up. I just want, oh, Marcia, did you want to add something before I jump into that? I see your hand.
You're on mute, Marcia.
It could be either before or after, Lisa. I have some news from Don Quintana about the status of board recruiting. And I also have an answer to a question that was asked during the public invited to be heard. And I understand this is not a give and take, but there was a question asked about how council decides membership on this board. And I think that under the circumstances, that's part of this discussion. So why don't you do what you were planning to do and then call on me at the end? I'll leave my hand up to remind you.
Okay, I will do that. And then if your comments change the way that anyone feels about this decision, we can revisit. So my question is just since we have board applications and interviews coming up, the question to you all is, do you want to go with the same process that we did before, which is where you had a nominating group of folks? I think there were 2 people, if I'm remembering correctly, that reviewed the applicants and did an interview and then essentially recommended those applicants back to the board at the May meeting for approval. And if so, I would need you all to nominate those volunteers at this meeting. The alternative would be to figure out how to schedule interviews with the whole board and all of the applicants. That is a decision for you all to make. So in light of that, does it make sense to hear Marcia's information before you all decide? Okay, Marcia, I'm going to pass it off to you and then we'll come back to that decision.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I don't think anything I'm going to say is going to affect that decision, but it may, well, you may want to discuss it. Yeah. So I just heard from Don Quintana. This board has 1 open seat and 1 applicant, which means that it's not a very sweeping decision either way. I do ask if you interview the person with the entire board that you let me know when you're going to do that, because when you do that, I should not be present. So, you know, if you do it as part of one of these board meetings, make sure that I'm not there. The other thing is about who should be referred to the board and who the council would reject. Ms. Kelly listed a lot of things that she thought the board should be considering. And I would like to point out that many of them, such as the presence of 5G small cells in the city, are entirely outside the jurisdiction of the city and therefore outside the purview of this board. And the other thing that's outside the purview of this board is revisiting questions that have already been decided by the council. You know, this is an advisory board. I happen to believe that advisory boards should take a stronger role than they do. And I advise most of the boards that where I am the council liaison to do that. And if anybody wants to know how, you know, I'm happy to do that with this board. This board is really pretty, you know, usually has a full agenda, and so it hasn't come up. But nevertheless, council is not going to be rejecting people on ideology, but they are going to be rejecting people who don't want to, who are clearly, I think, using the board for purposes other than the board's charter. And I think that that's, you know, that's really an important thing to a distinction that needs to be made. The other thing that you might want to consider deciding is if you want more than one choice, we have the option of doing a full court press to get additional applicants and extending the application period by a week or 2. So you can, you know, discuss that. It'll be a recommendation of the board, not a decision of the board, but I would pass that back on to the city clerk. And that's all I've got.
Thank you, Marcia. I just want to make one correction that I don't think those comments were from Doe Kelly. I believe that was the other public invited to be heard member. So I just want to clarify that. No problem. So I will leave it up to you all to discuss. I do believe, and Marcia, I don't know if you have an answer to this. If we do put out, extend the application period, I think we're under a pretty tight deadline to get that recommendation back to Dawn, who is in our city manager's office. Because I think we would need to have recommendations at the board, at the May board meeting, so that we can get them to her. I think it's the first week of June, which would be before the June meeting. So,
You know, I think that detail is in Dawn's email and I didn't pick up on it because I thought this would be a yes or no. So let me
okay.
Shut up and I'll raise my hand again if with when I have the better information.
I see Heather on, so I think Heather might have that answer for us.
The city website says that city council will be making those decisions on June 17th. So we might have a little bit of wiggle room there. But Marcia might have more information from Dawn's email.
Okay.
Heather, sorry.
That's okay.
I meant Lisa. Lisa, will you remind us about the process of reviewing the applications? So either a couple of folks on the board review the applications and then recommend the applications to council, or go ahead.
To the back to the board. So we would
Okay.
come, that group of people, that selection committee, which is how we did it last time. No, Heather's tip. I should hand it back to Heather because I'm going to give you incorrect information. I'm sorry.
So last time the board commissioned a nominating committee of 2 members who did the recommendations and sent those on to council on behalf of the board.
Thank you, Heather.
Yeah.
That is the answer.
Good. Perfect.
Sorry.
Thanks for the reminder. And with one person, one applicant, is it necessary? Is that a necessary process for us?
It is possible that if the board did not feel like the person met the requirements, that they could not recommend anyone to council.
Fair enough. Okay.
And Marcia, I saw you hit your hand back up.
Yes. Yeah, Dawn, based on what Heather said and what's in Dawn's email, she is not feeling crunched in terms of extending the application deadline. Let's see, when is your May meeting? What date?
I believe it's May the 15th.
Okay, so she could extend it by a full week or even 2 weeks and still get in under the wire so that you could be interviewing people on the 15th.
17th, I think.
17th, even better, but a little bit. So, yeah, I don't think you should feel that it's that, you know, that you should be worried about extending the deadline if you'd like to have a wider choice. We do, I would like to remind you, because last year there was a lot of confusion about this, that the intent is that you pick either the exact set of candidates you want to be on the board out of all the applicants, or perhaps the exact set plus one plus a spare, to give the council some options to exercise, but not refer everybody because you want to be exclusive, you know, you want to be hyper inclusive, because all that does is put a burden on the council that they can't really shoulder very effectively because they have such a limited time to interview all those candidates. So by exercising your best oversight, you also enable the council to exercise their best oversight.
Yeah,
so-
thanks, Marcia. And
Yeah.
and I think that also reiterates the intent of changing this process so that the folks who are really doing this work can help inform council of who they think would best serve the work of the board. I do want to say we have a couple of things already on the agenda for May. Some things I can move around. One thing that I don't think I can is a request from the Boulder County Transportation folks who have been doing the 287 Vision Zero corridor work, that you all have seen some information around, and I know you all have expressed some interest in transportation issues this year. They wanted to come to your May meeting to present their study and get feedback from you all, and I think that'll take a pretty decent chunk of time. And the update from the water efficiency master plan, I think there's some flexibility in that one. So I just want to take that into consideration if you all are interested in doing interviews during the May board meeting.
And the alternative would be to interview them separately and then just validate the recommendations of the subcommittee at the May
Well, it would
meeting.
be, as
That clear?
Heather mentioned earlier, that essentially the responsibility would be passed to the nominating committee that then would make those recommendations directly to council, and it would just be an update to the board at that time.
I see. Thank you.
For water board, what we did, they have had full board interviews, and we just did them ahead of the monthly meeting. It's not a public meeting because it is an interview, so it's something that we notice, but it's not something that the public is allowed to attend, and is not something that we then discuss at the regular meeting. But that is also an option. If you wanted to do a full board thing, we can make maybe the first part of the meeting that, and then say that the actual business of the meeting was going to start a little bit later or something after the interviews were over.
And we had, I think, 30 minutes per interview last time. Is that?
Yeah,
correct?
up to 30 minutes.
Up to 30 minutes, yeah. So that is,
This is
if
also
we
an
had,
opportunity, if you all want, if you know of people who would be interested, to maybe reach out and invite them to apply as well, so that we do have more applicants to interview.
I do want to say that if we had more, right now we only have one applicant, but if we had multiple applicants with up to 30-minute interviews, and we try to stack that on with our other, I don't think we could guarantee we'd get other business done.
Charles.
So just as a quick comment, I was one of the 2 board members that interviewed candidates last time. And I didn't really like the idea that it was only 2 of us. That I think we need a broader perspective in considering board members. And so having the full board or significantly more than 2 board members interview, I think was definitely better. It just seems like with only 2, it's really hard to I don't know, to even have a kind of I guess I already said the broad perspective, but to be able to really give, I think, candidates a fair shot to really be understood, because sometimes especially interviewing over Zoom, not the ideal way to interview. And I think when there's only 2 people interviewing, it exacerbates some of the challenges of interviewing over Zoom. Some people don't come across in the same way. I think even us in our board discussions and things, in the way we even come across to the public, I think it may be different, just because over Zoom, things just don't come across the same. So I am a strong advocate for either having the full board or significantly more than 2 board members do the interviewing this next time.
Thanks for that. Marcia, your hand's up.
Yes, just reminding Charles and the board that if it's any number between 2 and the full board, it still has to be a noticed public meeting. Doesn't have to be recorded, and it does not have to be you don't have to have public invited to be heard or anything. So that's the problem. I think it's an executive session, so you could, you open the meeting with publicly, and then you say, we're going to go into executive session to conduct interviews and shoo all the public away. So, but it's a lot of extra stuff to have a third or fourth person. So your best choices are either a committee of 2 or the full board. You can choose what you want, of course, but
Yeah.
you just have to go through all that if you're going to have 3 or 4 people.
And Heather notified me that it is just a notice. It's not open to the public, but it does have to be recorded for council, but not publicized. So.
Okay.
Okay, Robert, I see your hand, and then I have a question for Charles.
My question was that we changed our quorum rules to have a minimum of 4 people for the meetings. Does that change what, if we have 3 people, does that, okay, never mind that.
I don't think so. I'm curious, Charles, if you would feel better about a subcommittee of 2 people if that then came back to the board for final approval and off to council.
Guess it would depend on how it came back to the full board. Yeah, it's just, I trust the board members, and I think we do our best to try to be fair and to try to be open to the ideas of the applicants, for example, and in general to each other. It's just that I think when you have a small group, it's harder to really take into consideration that those broader qualities of a potential candidate, and it just depends on how it was brought to the full board. So I know just last time it felt a little like there's too much almost trust in the 2 board members, and I was one of them, to make that decision. We did a good job. I mean, we have Michelle and Ralph with us, so that I think we made good decisions. But there's the potential to put too much decision making into the hands of too few people, and then when the full board considers it, basically it's almost like a rubber stamp, basically. So, yeah, at least that's how it was last time.
I appreciate your thoughts there. Thank you. Robert, your hand's up again.
I was just going to say that I feel like the challenge of presenting a group of candidates in front of the whole board in a formal public board meeting, we're going to have to scrutinize potentially, if there are meaningfully more applicants than positions, why someone is a better fit to serve Longmont in this capacity. And that can be uncomfortable and be hard to do in a way that people feel good about publicly. And now maybe we can go to some sort of executive session and do that and make that done privately. But doing that openly in front of the public, I think it makes it very hard to have productive dialogue without worrying about being sensitive to the feelings of people who are really just trying to make Longmont a better place.
Yeah, thanks for that thought. Marcia.
My unmute is not unmuting properly. I think you wouldn't interview them in public. I mean, you would effectively go into executive session. The reason I raised my hand is to say that since you have 1 opening and 1 applicant at this point, and obviously you could still get another applicant or 2 on Friday, and a lot of people have been known to historically cut it close and apply on the last day. But you're not going to have a lot of people if we don't, and you can always choose not to extend the application period. So that's another thing that you could do too, and sort of bank on having a small number of people one way or the other.
Jim.
So can I just reiterate really quick that even though the meeting would be recorded, it would not be distributed publicly anywhere. So if you did do it as a full board, council would have access to that video so they could review it beforehand. But your comments and discussion would not be recorded in writing or for public consumption in any way.
I was just going to say, I don't think it's kind of a full board. I don't think I'd want to be on a small committee making this decision, but I could definitely see it as something that we do kind of as a full board. When I when I interviewed for this, it was like 3 minutes with the city council. Like there was like no, yeah, it was like, and so for me, it'd be very interesting to kind of like see what the process is like now and actually be a part of it for probably for the first time.
James, I just want you to know that we hated it too.
It was a conveyor belt. It was yeah, it didn't even warm up the seat, I don't think.
Yeah, that was tough. Okay, so I think I'm hearing a general leaning toward a full board interview, as long as it's not public, which I think has been established it would not be. Would we want to do it ahead of the or at the beginning of the next board meeting? So I think depending on the number of applicants, that would, we could either, I think, amend the amount of time we allow for each interview, or push back the meeting. Thoughts on that? Ralph?
My understanding from what I think Lisa said is that we're going to have a significant amount of business, and if we're on a time constraint here, I wonder if it makes sense to do them simultaneously. That's could be quite a long day, and we'll have some important work to do that day. It's just a concern. I also like the suggestion, that maybe the time of the full board, maybe if they're submitting, from what I recall, I mean, I just did this last year, filling out the application, giving a lot of information that, 15 minutes or 20 minutes to me would seem like more than enough time. But again, I'm new to the process, so I'm just sharing some random thoughts.
Thanks, Ralph. Robert?
So we have one open position. How are we going to handle someone who's currently on the board in that interview and recommendation process if they're seeking to refill that position?
So that person would have to recuse themselves from interviewing applicants.
Okay.
So we could theoretically meet at 4 o'clock for the next board meeting, have 30 minutes ahead of the meeting to do the interview, and then have our regular scheduled meetings starting at 4:30.
I do want to say, I think we would need time to discuss, because if we need, if there's only one and it's just a matter of do we advance this person or not, that's probably a pretty quick discussion. But if there happens to be multiple, and then it's a process of discussing and selecting the best fit, then that could take more time. So I just want to make sure we're allotting some potential time for that decision-making process.
Thanks for that. Mary, I see your hand.
This sounds like it's whether we have more than one applicant, it sounds like considerably more than half an hour. I would like to recommend that we plan an hour and that we open the public board meeting at, we start at 4 and we open the public board meeting at 5. And we consider doing interviews of 10 minutes.
You've muted yourself, I think.
Okay, sorry. We do interviews of 10 minutes duration. I was interviewed in the 3-minute before city council method, and I think I was probably chosen because my resume showed that I'd been involved in sustainability for a good period of time. I think we can tell a lot of folks about folks from their resumes and the materials they submit. And I recommend that we spend half an hour, 40 minutes talking to whomever applicants come, and then we spend another 20 minutes making our decision, at least a preliminary decision, and we try to do this efficiently in an hour. with the full board or whatever members of the board, are able to come that day. And then we would be able to make our recommendations forward, and anyone who's reapplying would not be at the first hour, but then and also would not know what recommendations were put forward to City Council until the final decision was made. Hopefully that wasn't too many steps to outline, but that seems to me like that would be a sane way to do it that wouldn't take up a lot of people's time and would allow us to continue to presume that there may be further applicants that we haven't seen yet.
I think that sounds like a great recommendation.
Okay, someone want to put that in a motion?
Did Heather write all that down so we can put it into a motion?
I'll say it again. I move we start the next meeting at 5 o'clock, at 4. We go for an hour. We spend 40 minutes interviewing applicants, a portion between whomever is applying. We spend 20 minutes making our preliminary choice with the folks who need to be recused. And then that information is forwarded to City Council, and City Council makes final decisions and announcements. Discussion? No, sorry, Kate.
I think the motion really just needs to be as basic as we'll do interviews beginning at 4 p.m. and start the meeting at 5 p.m. I don't think we need all of
That
those
sounds good.
details in there.
Okay.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second that. I think that sounds
Any
that sounds
discussion
very
on that?
reasonable.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. The motion passes. Moving on. Wait, there was one other suggestion. No, I think I think we can move on from that. Charles.
I think the thing that we haven't discussed really yet is whether to extend the deadline.
Yes.
What is the current deadline?
Friday, right?
Friday.
Can we extend it? Can we make a
2
decision to
days.
extend it if we don't get any more applicants between now and Friday, but if we do, to not extend it?
How many more applicants? Like, would one more be enough for you?
We only have one spot, right?
Yeah. Okay. Do we need, does that require?
That's just an idea. I don't want to pretend like I thought that through really well or anything like that. If people disagree, that's, I just thought, could we do something like that where we just have like a trigger on it where if we, we don't have to, I don't know.
Thoughts on that? Charles? Oh, I see Ralph's hand, sorry.
Why not just extend it and give ourselves the opportunity to select the best possible person? I mean, I'm not sure, as long as we know we can accommodate the timeline, I'm not sure what the downside is to giving a little more time and hoping that we have, additional people who may be attracted to be part of what we're doing.
Fair.
Could we extend it by a week and still have the discussion at the next meeting?
I don't think that there's a reason we couldn't.
So why don't we do that?
Oh, I think we can. Does that require a motion? Yes, okay. Would someone like to move that we extend the deadline?
I'll move that we extend.
Go ahead.
I move that we extend the deadline by 168 hours.
I will second that.
Okay.
Ralph's doing the math.
Any
That
discussion
way-
on that?
I'm assuming that's 1 week,
Yeah, well, I didn't know what time on Friday the deadline was.
5 p.m.
And so by saying 168 hours, it makes it 5 p.m. on the following Friday. There we go.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other discussion on that? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, looks like that was unanimous. And the motion passes, thanks. Now we can move on to the letter of support for sustainable aviation resolution. Lisa.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify with Heather a logistical piece on that. I assume that once we have all the materials, all of that will get forwarded to the board for review prior to that meeting, right? Perfect, thank you. Yeah, I realized I should have made a revision on this from letter of support to a request for formal action to recommend approval to city council. So there's not a letter of support included. With what was included, and I might lean on Marcia if you want to add anything to this, because Marcia is also the liaison for the I almost said the Sustainable Aviation Board, but it's not what it's called. Not yet.
Yes, not yet.
Great job.
Yeah. It is the 24th. I understand that's coming before.
The 25th, yeah. Next week.
Yeah, sorry, the
Yes.
25th. But the next regular meeting that it's so there's not time to draft a letter. It's, as you said, just have to be a formal recommendation to council to pass.
Yes.
Is I think what you're voting on,
Yes, thank you,
And-
Marcia. Yep.
right?
Yes, so you had the resolution included in your packet for review. So just a quick overview of that. I think this is really exciting. This was an initiative from gosh, I'm going to say it again, from the Airport Advisory Board to do a resolution focused on sustainability. So mostly, oh, I had it pulled up. Where did I put it? There we go. It's looking at increasing sustainable industries and airport jobs and business activity at the airport, looking at distributed energy resource opportunities and sustainable practices, and then really looking at alternative fuel and electric aviation at the airport. So that'll be coming in front of council on Tuesday, as Marcia mentioned, for approval. Marcia, do you want to add any context or information to that?
No, other than a recommendation that striking while the iron is hot is a good thing, because this is the first progressive airport advisory board there's probably ever been. And so, yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is a good time to do it. And the information we have from stakeholders, the FAA and other agencies that fund airports, is that a resolution of this sort would be very useful in obtaining grants. So, that's a good reason to do it too.
Yeah, and staff from my team and from Longmont Power and Communications help support drafting the resolution or adding content to the resolution to make sure that it aligns with our sustainability and climate action goals. And as Marcia mentioned, I think it's a great opportunity, and it's always awesome for us to see this kind of alignment coming from other places. So I will hand it over to you all for any questions or discussion, and then leave it to you all to vote on whether or not you would like to recommend council approve the resolution.
Ralph, I see your hand.
Thank you. And I only just figured out that I have to lower my hand or it stays up there. I thought you did that. But anyway, I'm getting better at this. I just had a few questions about this. I wondered if obviously the intent of this is fantastic. I just wondered if the recommendation includes certain things like installing electric chargers and upgrading amenities. And I was happy. One of my questions was, are grants available for this sort of thing, which Marcia mentioned, but specifically, has anybody presented what the cost would be or a guideline, or is this simply to open a recommendation, open discussion to explore these things? It could be that none of this has been investigated yet, but if we're going to support the recommendation, I just wondered whether or not the costs that are involved with this have been explored at this point.
Marcia, thanks for that question, Ron.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the answer is kind of both. A resolution should not be prescriptive and it doesn't have force in law. So for example, with respect to chargers, I happen to know that it's the intent of the board to install the closest to universal charging that they can get. Even if it's just turns out to be just for EVs, you know, out at the airport. But that hasn't been standardized yet because the FAA has approved no battery operated planes yet. They're all over Europe, but they're not here. So the resolution can't prescribe that, and it would not require the council to make code in a certain way anyway. So the resolution is essentially the policy yardstick that the council will apply when deciding what to fund later on and what grants to apply for. But it has to be informed by standards and laws and FAA rules and all of that stuff. And that's why you will see that the resolution is very simple and is a matter of intention rather than exact actions that need to be taken. Does that clarify, or did I have too many words?
No, it's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Other questions or thoughts on this? Okay. Would anybody like to make a motion on this resolution?
I'll move that we support the resolution that's provided to us. Not sure how to word that, but
I think it's recommend that council approve the airport advisory board sustainability resolution.
I move that the board recommend the aviation sustainability resolution. Whatever, what Lisa said.
Great.
I will second what Lisa said.
Any further discussion on this? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And it looks like the resolution or the motion passes. Thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So the next item on the agenda is items from staff. Is there anything from staff this month? Hearing nothing, we'll move on. 2 items from the board. Anyone on the board have anything to bring up? Jim.
Sorry, I know we mentioned it last week, but I would like us to, at some point in the future, talk about the composting rule changes and if we can do anything to help advise ways around that. I know that's, I know we have a very busy schedule, but I'd just like to keep that on our radar.
I was gonna bring that up as well. I got the letter, but just want to make sure people are informed and what that means.
Yes. Okay. All right then. Anything from council?
Yes. First, I'd like to thank everyone. I thought you've been presented with ethical decisions that you probably didn't sign up for. And so I appreciate the wisdom with which you've been considering them and carrying them out. And the second thing is with respect to composting, there are things that you can do. You can inform yourselves on alternatives, methods of composting, and something that I've always wanted to deal with, which is the carbon footprint of long distance transport of compost materials in either direction. So I'd like that to be considered. And also you can draft a resolution that says, for example, that the city, that in this board's opinion, the city should invest in getting back to where we were with composting, as an example. I'm not even, I don't recommend to you, you recommend to the council. So, but as an example of the kind of resolution you could put together with a bunch of whereases that were the reasons that informed your recommendation, because sending a resolution to the council is always the strongest statement you can make, and it goes into priority-based budgeting for the following year. And if you, even if you guys want to set, have a committee of 2, for example, that wanted to research it this month and come back next month with a simple resolution, you could do that and get under the wire in time for priority based budgeting. So, you don't have to, obviously, but it's absolutely something that you can do. Is, it's right in the nature of this board's sweet spot in terms of making a recommendation like that.
Thank you for that.
That's all I got.
Appreciate it. Thanks. Anyone interested in drafting a resolution in their free time?
I wouldn't mind taking a stab at it. I don't know if I've ever typed whereas in my entire life, but I wouldn't mind trying to take a stab at like the outline of one. But being involved in taking a stab at the outline, I don't need to do it myself, obviously.
James,
But,
you just to ease your mind, sorry for speaking out of term, but you do have a simple, clean example in the airport sustainability, right in front of you. And the other thing is you don't have to get the details of the language right at all, because it has to go through the city attorney's office anyway. So as long as you get the whereas is right and the now therefore is in the right place, they'll clean up the rest for you.
just do a global find and replace with airport and compost and see if that.
Oh, well, I think it'll take more than that, but yeah.
No, but I'd actually love to be involved in trying to get that ready for next meeting.
Anyone want to help with that? Mary, are you?
No, I just have a question. So was talking about compost something that we were charged for the city council to be discussing at the next month's meeting? I'm just confused about how we actually decide what it is that we work on at this point.
Well, so the recommendation or the thought from, recommendation from Marcia is that if we want to get in before the budgeting period, I do not remember the exact words you said, but then we would have to do it before the next meeting. Is that Is that correct?
Yeah, it not necessarily, but it has its most effect because most of the budgeting is done, you know, in the months of May and very early June. So, you know, and even if you wanted to take 6 months to do it, it would still be a good thing to do, to give recommendations to council. I'd also like to clarify, because I think Mary was making an implication in making an inference about, you know, this board only does what the council charters it to do. And that is both right and wrong. This board's charter is to advise the council on matters of sustainability, life sciences, etc. And the council's job is to recommend actions to the council that are within the council's power to affect. You know, so if for example, you wanted to ban 5G small cells from the city of Longmont, one of the staff members or your council liaison would have the duty of saying, you guys are outside the lines here because the council doesn't have the authority to do that. So please don't spend your time on it. But if you completely have the freedom to decide we want to work on composting versus we want to work on ways to do equitable electrification versus ways to promote, you know, better insulation for low-income persons. You know, there are all kinds of things that are within the council's jurisdiction that are appropriate for you to discuss.
Well, actually, I wasn't responding to that point, Marcia. I was responding to the point you made that we are only to decide on things that the city has not already made a decision on. Didn't the city make a decision about composting? And how do we know what that means? What decisions we have been made that we can and cannot intervene on? That's very unclear to me.
And that's why you have liaisons from both the council and the advisory board. So you could propose doing a lot of things, and if they were not appropriate, then you would be so advised. No, in fact, the council made the decision that we have we compost a very wide variety of materials, and the only composting provider in the state has narrowed their focus and will not take some of the materials that we were sending them before. And so we have had to settle for doing something less than what the council's decision was. The council's decision is in a sense moot. Therefore, this board could properly research other ways of getting the council's initial intention done, or the council or this board could say, you know, we don't recommend spending a lot more time, you know, or effort or money trying to get back to where we were because the carbon footprint gains are so small, or maybe even negative because of hauling it around. Or we could say that we have found that that putting a digester here in Longmont, in fact, would reduce the carbon footprint and get us back to where we were. So there are a wide variety of options that that this board could make, including, you know, that you know, they may be recommending that the council does or does not pursue keeping up with the decision that it's already made. So, you know, you've got a lot of leeway, or you could choose not to take up the subject at all.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Mm-hmm.
Jim and then Michelle.
Yeah, I know we're running short on time here. I see it because the zero waste initiative is a core part of the sustainability plan. I see it as something that is totally within our purview. And I guess the reason that I'm curious about it is that my understanding is that a big reason that the composter changed the rules is because people were trying to compost all kinds of nonsense. And it seems to me that there are fixes that involve public outreach and education that are low cost and might be something that we might want to pursue if we do in fact think that composting is an important part of the future. So for me, because we've talked about zero waste in this board for years, I see that as an important part of the of things.
Yeah, thank you. Agree. Michelle, and then Marcia.
I was just wondering, since I was just kind of learning about the resolutions with the airport resolution. So if Jim were to make a resolution, take a stab at the initial, does it get brought to our meeting and then do we all have to agree and like work together to do a resolution that we would bring to city council? Just wondering how it works.
I have also never been involved in the creation of a resolution. So, Marcia, I think you were hoping to say something different, but could you help us with that question as well?
They're both easy.
Okay.
Okay, so one is Jim as an individual can do whatever he wants. And so he could draft a resolution and take it straight to council. On the other hand, Jim could also draft a resolution and take it to this board. And if this board recommended it, it would carry more weight with council than what Jim sent to council all by himself as an individual. That's just the way it works because that's the charter of this board, is to do stuff like that. The thing I intended to say was that, sending crummy stuff to the composter was probably 80% of the problem, but the other last 20% of the problem is that the method they used, which was not a digester, means that some of the so-called compostables that we have been putting in our compost stream were not composted by what they did, right? So, like those plastic spoons that are compostable, two problems with them. Some of the plastic spoons weren't really compostable, and their method doesn't do a good job on the ones that are really compostable. The same for those plastic cups that are not made of plastic. So the situation we're in now is that A1, I think their name is A1, is considering going to digestion as a method. And the other one is that the other option would be that Longmont could choose to install a digester here, which has the possible consequences of people are going to think it's going to stink or, whatever. And then we would have that battle to go through. Or we could just decide that we are never going to deal with those plastic spoons and cups, or compostable spoons and cups. So, those, I think, as far as we know, those are the three options before us. And it's appropriate for you as a board to either recommend one of those or to ignore the whole problem and let the council decide by itself, or actually let Charlie and Bob decide by themselves and recommend to council. But that's the situation.
Thank you. Okay. So it sounds to me like Jim is gonna take a stab at a resolution.
Yeah.
He did offer that he didn't need to be the only one to do that. If anybody wants to volunteer to work with Jim on that, now is a good time to raise your hand. Lisa.
Well, I'm not exactly volunteering for that, although yeah, I am more than happy and have written numerous resolutions and more whereases than I can count. So I'm happy to support that. I do want to to not put you so much in the hot seat, Jim, I don't know that we would have time to discuss it at our May meeting. So if
Okay.
you want to put that on, sorry for the background noise, potentially the June meeting, which I think we have a reasonable amount of flexibility on, which also we would have probably an update on the universal recycling ordinance. So those two things would very much go hand in hand. And I can ask Charlie Kimonides, who's our sanitation manager, to also come to that meeting and talk to you all about. He's been the one that has been very steeped in all of the conversations with A1 Organics and kind of what's on the horizon, and all of that. So he would be incredibly knowledgeable. But I just wanted to say I wouldn't put the time frame for May. So give yourself time and holler at me if I can support you.
It might also make sense to try to take a stab at just having a draft of something that other people could look at by next meeting, so that by the time we actually have people from city here, it's gone through many more brains than mine.
That's good. Yeah. Marcia.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that Charlie himself would welcome contact from you, James. If you wanted to make the resolution, for example, be informed by what Charlie has figured out as the best route. That's another thing too, or just help you get it right, whatever.
Could I be
He's
put in
just
touch
that
with
kind of
Charlie?
guy.
Yeah, Jim, I'll help you get in touch with Charlie.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I appreciate it.
Charles.
I'd be happy to work with Jim on a resolution. I just entered into ChatGPT to convert the statement of supporting a composting as a resolution, and it converted and made a very nice resolution. So it can be very helpful for us who don't have those language skills.
Wow.
Well, there you go.
Done.
It might even pass legal.
I've seen the term. I've seen the Terminator, and I'm very wary of these tools, and so I'll take a stab myself.
Just be sure you fact check it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, it does need supervision.
Fair enough. Ralph, I see your hand.
Just a quick question while we're talking about this, because I have some background in this. Does the city now have a waste to energy program? There's equipment out there that takes waste, turns it into energy, and I know a company that's involved in the research on this. Is the city doing anything like that?
Yes, some. So the city's waste treatment plant does methane capture at the waste treatment plant, and the captured methane is put in fuel cells and it runs the garbage fleet. So you've essentially got net zero garbage collection. More methane is captured than the garbage fleet needs. And right now it's flared, which is not an ideal solution. So the city, I think, is actually considering converting another portion of the city fleet to also be natural gas powered. Now that's not all you can do with the waste to fuel or waste to energy, but that's what the city does today.
Great. Michelle, your hand is up, and then Mary, I see your hand.
I was just gonna say I don't really want to write it, but I'd be glad to take a look at the resolution and offer feedback or anything. Chat GPT was a great idea to just take an initial stab at it, sure, but yeah, I can offer feedback, but I'll leave the writing to you.
I think there might be a division on the board on the AI, but we'll let that be.
We'll use Chat JIM.
There you go. Mary.
I'm just wondering on the question of waste to energy conversion, if there's ever been any presentations or serious attention paid by the city to looking at incineration or pyrolysis of any portion of the waste stream, including biosolids and or just a straight trash incineration in the context of energy capture.
Lisa, you've been at this longer, not in my memory, so that's, but you've been at this longer.
Not in my memory as well. We haven't looked at that.
Thank
Okay.
Yeah, and just a reminder to folks, if you, as we work on that resolution, that we, that we make sure that that's kind of done in a way that doesn't violate the sunshine law. So if you all, Jim, I can coordinate with you and you can draft, and then I can coordinate with folks to review.
Mhm. I was
Great.
gonna say, Jim and Charles can go back and forth as much as they want. But if Michelle or others want to review it, it should be sent to the chair. The chair sends it out to everyone. And if people reply with comments, they reply only to the chair. And then you're good. And
So
don't delete the
BCC
emails.
is your friend.
All right.
Okay. I think that brings us to the next item on the agenda, which is informational items and board correspondence, which is at the end of the board packet. Just letting everybody know it's there. And please do read through that. Yes, Lisa.
I'm sorry, I was letting the airport folks know of your decision when the items from staff came up, and so I think I vaguely heard you say hearing nothing but moving along. And I realized that I forgot to plug the Earth Day event this weekend. So Saturday, 10 to 3 at Centennial Park. That's organized by Sustainable Resilient Longmont, or SRL. The city will have a big presence there. There will be lots of activities. I'm hoping it'll be outside. The weather looks like it could go either direction, but if not, there's a contingency plan to be inside the school, I think it's Timberline. So please come, enjoy the activities. It'll be super fun, and celebrate Earth Day. So even if you don't want to do that event, that's fine, but happy Earth Day to all.
Happy Earth Day on Saturday. Thanks for the reminder of that. Hope to see folks there. So that brings us to the end of the agenda. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
A second. Robert. Okay, all in favor. All right, and the motion passes. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
See you all.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.